All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the 2022 CAMP IPPS Common Procurement Card Expense Report Errors course. I am Patrick, the Procurement Card Program Manager, and your host for today's CAMP course. Today, we will be reviewing Common Procurement Card Expense Report Errors. A few things before we get started. This course is slated for 30 minutes. This course is best suited for those who regularly create and submit expense reports and have a role of a cardholder or delegate. Since we have a large audience for today, I am kindly asking that you please turn off your videos to reduce bandwidth and internet issues. I will do the same as well once I begin the presentation. Everyone is on mute. Please only unmute if prompted to do so by myself or a moderator. Our moderators for today are Emily Wong, Kelly Sanchez, and Vanessa Torres. We ask that you submit any questions you have via the chat. We will have about 5 minutes to answer questions that come in via the chat. The moderators will be answering questions during the presentation. Please do not direct message myself, as I will not be checking the chats as we progress through the course. So please, when you're submitting your questions, submit to all and not to direct message myself. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video as I begin the presentation. The topics we will be covering today will be the difference between yellow and red alerts on concur expense reports, how to interpret a returned expense report status, what a COA fail validation error means, and what a POTAF fail validation error means. Let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first type of alert I want to review today are the differences between yellow alerts and red alerts within an expense report. These are alerts that may appear when you try to submit an expense report. Depending on the color of the alert and what the alert says will determine how you will proceed. A yellow alert means for you to slow down and proceed with caution. If you take a look at the example shown on the screen, you can see the very top of the page states alerts 5 next to a yellow triangle with a black exclamation inside of it. If you click on the drop-down arrow to the right, the screen will open up and look like the top portion of this example. It will list out all 5 alerts and provide insights as to what the issue might be with each one. If you take a look at the first 3 highlighted rows, you can see that it states, this expense entry may be a duplicate of the following expense. This will not prevent the expense report from being submitted. On these report examples, for privacy reasons, we've blurred out the report ID. It states the expenditure type followed by the dollar amount of the transaction. This is one of the most common errors. These yellow alerts will not stop you from being able to submit an expense report. Concur recognizes that you may have the same transaction with the same dollar amount, date, and vendor name. So it's just want to make sure that you're reviewing it to ensure they are correct and that the vendor did not accidentally charge you twice. If you take a look at this second example, you will see the yellow triangles next to each line item that it thinks that might be a duplicate. So as a cardholder or delegate, your only responsibility with this specific alert is to ensure your transactions are not duplicates. Once you've reviewed that they're not duplicates, you can go ahead and proceed to reconcile your expenses. Now we're going to switch gears a bit to red alerts. When you try to submit an expense report and which requires action to be taken by changing something within the expense report, the report will return with a red alert. When a red alert appears at the top of an expense report, This pretty much means stop. Action is required. The top of the expense report will tell you alerts, 6 for the number of alerts that there are. For this example, you will see one of the most common expense report errors we see, which is action. This report must be submitted by the cardholder to certify their expenses. An email will be sent to the cardholder tomorrow to notify them that this report is ready. So this error means that the person trying to click submit on the expense report does not have the authority to do so and needs to have the cardholder physically certify their expenses by clicking the final submit button on the expense report. There might be times when you have both yellow and red alerts on the same expense report. When you see an alert or alerts at the top of your expense report, you'll want to click on the drop-down arrow to the right to view what those alerts are. So to recap, once open, you can scroll down and see what the errors are. The ones in red require actions. The ones in yellow require review. If you click on view next to the error, it will take you to the specific expense that needs attention. If you take a look at the example provided, you can see where the arrows are pointed to the word view. Clicking on view will open up the error to provide you additional information that you may not be able to view at the top of your expense report. There's one less area in Concur that you will see a return expense report error. This will be on your main expense homepage in Concur. The main expense homepage is where you can view all of the expense report you are currently waiting on or awaiting approval. When Concur has recognized an error in your report, the system will return it back to the user, or if an approver needs something corrected, they will have the ability to send the report back as well. At the top of each expense report box, different colors means different statuses. A blue header means not submitted. It is still being worked on. A green header means submitted, and it has moved to the next person in the approval flow. A red header returned means that it was sent back to the user and an action is actually required. Let's take a closer look at the statuses at the bottom of each expense report view. These are important. So in this first example, you can clearly see an expense report has been returned. If you look closely at the bottom of the red alert square, it states sent back to user, and then right underneath that, it says Concur system. This means that Concur found an error in the report, so it is sending it back to the user to correct. Certain items have been blurred out for privacy purposes. Now, in this next example, if you take a look at the bottom of the red alert square, it states sent back to user, and the line right underneath it has a name, Joe Smith. If the second line shows the name of an actual person, that means the expense report was sent back to the user by that person. Typically, when we see a person has returned a report, they will leave a comment. To view the comments, you will open the expense report and view details. These tips on how to read these types of errors will help you determine what steps you need to take first. Okay, so moving on to the more difficult expense report errors. There are two main types of errors that may appear on a returned expense report. The two most common are COA, failed validation error, and a POTAF failed validation error. What is a COA failed validation? The COA failed validation error means that the issue is located within the chart of account information, which is the fund, financial unit, approver, function, program, location, project. So what is a POTAF fail validation error? A POTAF fail validation error means that the issue is located within the POTAF information, which is the project, expenditure type, task, funding source. There are 9 different types of COA errors and 9 different types of POTAF errors. We have a KBA that covers all 18 different types of errors. We will share the link at the end of this course. COA and POTAF validation is pretty much a process that was built into Concur to reduce errors and posting to the ledgers. We somewhat know how to resolve the errors, but it's not necessarily something that our team actually manage. If you have questions about these errors, the best resource will always be your fund manager or your financial unit approver. Keep in mind, we will only be reviewing here the most common errors. Let's take a look at our first common error, what it means, and how to resolve it. COA fail validation. You're using a segment value that does not exist. This means that the COA value is missing in your report header. So how do you resolve it? Ensure that all required fields, including the fund value, are filled out. Once you click Save and resubmit your expense report, the error will clear out required fields, including the fund value, are filled out. Please note that you should not manually type in your fund or any COA fields. You should start to type it in and then search for it from the drop-down menu. So best practice recommendation is that you should never try to copy and paste or type out the full field in any fields on an expense report. POTAF fail validation, the expenditure type doesn't exist because it doesn't have a valid expenditure type ID. So what does this mean? This is an error related to the expenditure type value. So the chart string appearing in Concur would read the project, the task, the expenditure type, and funding source. The 2 dots after the task value indicates that the expenditure type is missing. So how do you resolve it? You want to double check all of your expenses and allocation in your request or report to ensure that an expenditure type was chosen. To add an expenditure type to a request, please click on an expense line entry, select Allocate from the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and add in an expenditure type. Resubmit the request or expense report. Expense types impacts the tax, but the expenditure type affects where the transaction is posted in PPM. For our final example, POTAF fail validation. You must provide a value for the funding source, name, attribute. The value of the attribute contract number isn't valid. So what does this mean? This is an error related to the funding source not being provided. All sponsored projects must have a funding source value input in Concur. So how do you resolve it? You want to double check the report header and allocations to ensure that a funding source was chosen. Then you want to resubmit the expense report. And if the errors continue to persist, you want to submit a services and support ticket to the Office of Post-Award Financial Services, OPAFS. So same as before, you cannot manually type in your funding source. You must start to type it in and then search for it in the drop-down menu. Again, best practice is to never try to copy and paste or type out a full field in any of the fields on an expense report. If you do not know if your project has a funding source, then you can start to type it in and see what comes up. Your task and funding source will load based off the project you've entered. So if your project does not have a funding source, it will say no results found in the drop-down menu. If you're getting this error and see that the values are correct in the header, you'll need to check your allocations. So this brings us to the end of our common error examples. As promised, here are some of the links and knowledge-based articles that were covered in today's presentation. These links are also being provided to you in the chat. This presentation will be posted on the procurement card blank pages within the next few weeks, and a copy of the slides will be shared with the registered attendees after camp. So this pretty much concludes our review portion for camp today. We're going to go ahead and spend the next few minutes answering questions that came in from the chat.
Thank you, Patrick. So we didn't get too many questions. We just got a few. So I'm going to go ahead and read them off and then answer them, and then have you just jump in on the last couple ones. So the first one was from Deborah. The cardholder must submit the report. Shouldn't it be considered an error on the delegate's part? This always makes me think I did something incorrectly. Can it at least be just a yellow warning? So Deborah, it is considered an error because the error is that the delegate tried to submit it and you can't. The delegate doesn't have authority to do so. And since red alerts mean action is required, the action that needs to be taken would be that the cardholder needs to submit their expense report. If there is an issue with you as a delegate submitting it, the error is going to tell you what it is that you need to do. So the first part of this, we went over like how to look at that. So it will tell you, what you need to do. And if it states it's the cardholder piece, then you would know it wouldn't relate to you. The next one that we got is Concur only validates individual pieces of COA and POTAF, not the whole COA, meaning that someone can enter any combination of values in the fields and the report will go through even if the values entered do not actually go together. We have had lots of reports go through and post to projects in the wrong financial units and have had to clean up a bunch of charges in other departments because of this. Is there any plan to make the validation do the entire string? This is correct. Any combination can be entered on the report and we'll go through even if the values don't go together because the combinations can be changed at any point. If you're having expense reports that are posting to the wrong projects, this means that the approvers that are actually approving those expense reports, they should be checking for it at the time of approval and sending the expense reports back or making the corrections. So I feel like it would kind of go back to training with the approvers. They shouldn't be approving them if they're on the wrong chart string, because there's no way to solidify validating the entire string in case something is going where they're not going to match together. So I don't foresee Concur changing that on there because that is the responsibility of the approver at the time that they are approving that. Patrick,
If
I
you
was
don't
going to
mind,
ask you to chime in on that one.
yeah, so that's a great question, and that that brings to the responsibilities of the financial unit approver upon approving these expense reports. The financial unit approver not only should be ensuring that the chart strings are correct, but they should also be reviewing the attachments, which is the receipts, whether it's the digital receipt or the physical receipt that is being attached to that expense report. So ultimately, the last line of defense to ensure that these transactions are posting correctly to where they need to be posted at is the financial unit approver. So as Vanessa mentioned, there may be training opportunities as far as for those financial unit approvers if that is not being done correctly.
Thank you, Patrick. The next one is, can we please get examples of sponsored versus non-sponsored so we have a better idea of when a funding source is needed? So I didn't provide any of those because that's not a common question that we get ever. I think this is like the third time I've been asked in 2 years. Also, Patrick, if you can chime in on this, how they determine when a funding source is needed is based off of the chart string that they're using, correct? Like, wouldn't that have to come from their financial unit approver of when the funding source is needed for sponsored versus non-sponsored projects?
Yes, you are correct. So rule of thumb is that as a cardholders, if you ever have questions about what chart strings you should be entering, all of those questions should be being addressed by your financial unit approver / your fund manager. They're the ones that manage those funds and would have specific answers for you. As far as from our team, we're not necessarily the ones that's versed in that. So the first person that we will tell you to reach out to is your fund manager or your financial unit approver. They would be better suited to direct you on what chart strings to be able to enter.
Okay, awesome. And then I just did want to add that there is a project COA lookup tool in OFC. So that would be sponsored versus non-sponsored is based on the project. So you can always look up the project within the lookup tool. And then I will see if I can get that and send it in the chat, the link to that. Next question was, is there a way to submit all event expenses within one expense report? And so I'm assuming by this question that is in reference, let's see, this was talent. I'm assuming this is in reference to your meaning like procurement card charges and non-P card charges.
Correct.
Okay, so there's not, because it would be nice, but it's not possible because when you, in your report header, when you select the type, and there's those 3 to select from, the 3 or 4 to select from, depending on what you pick is the type of information you have to input that is either required for travel or not required for us. There's also different type of approval flows that have to do with event expenses or say travel card expenses that are different. P card needs the least amount of, procurement card needs the least amount of approvals and basically backup documentation, information. Like we require the most, I think, out of any payment method when it comes to reconciling to providing that. And because other payment methods need more, there is no way to combine the screens. They just did it separately because then if you were to combine all that, imagine having to combine all the information that's asked for travel, personal reimbursements, or the, and then with like P card, it would just inundate the report header screen and would just be too much. So that's why they separated them on there based off what the requirements are. Patrick, I don't know if you want to chime in on that one.
Yeah, just to add a bit. Also, just because of the scope of our card programs as far as for this campus, normal organizations may have a few hundred card holders where they could have one card, which is, serves the same purpose as a travel or procurement card, where they can combine those expense report. Our campus is on the larger scale. We have over 3,500 procurement cards and 3,500 travel cards as well. So that's over 7,000 cards and about 20,000 as far as expenses coming through a month. So that's why we had to have a platform that differentiate between the two.
Thank you. Okay, and then the next question is, if the expenditure type field in the expense line item main page is left blank, but the expenditure type is filled out in the allocation section, the top left button, would the report be okay to approve, or would the approver need to send it back? I don't think it allows you to leave it blank. You can submit it. It's going to kick it back. I've never seen it go through with it being left blank.
Oh,
Patrick.
yes, and we're speaking at the header level, correct? To be left blank?
I don't,
Demi, is it at the header level or
it's
on
when
the
you
actual?
click, it's when you click into the actual expense. So as I'm the approver for a lot of the transactions and I often see it blank, but if I click into allocation, I see that the expenditure type field is filled out.
Gotcha. So they left it blank in the expense, but because they allocated it, I think because it picks it up at least once, Patrick. I actually didn't know that that was a thing. I've never actually seen it left blank on the expense and then only filled out in allocation. I've seen it only filled out in both. But if it's letting you guys do that, honestly, I don't see it being an issue, only because if it's not kicking it back, because you may have left it blank in the expense, but you allocated it. So it's going to go to whatever the allocation said.
Okay, so as long as the allocation part has the information, it's fine to approve.
Yeah, I just think it's weird that it's letting it go through blank. If you get another example of that, could you send that to me? And I can just look at the rule behind it to see why that's happening. I've just never seen that.
Yeah, I have one. I
be
can.
curious. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Demi. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay. The last two questions were just
Vanessa, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to stop you, because just being cognizant as far as the time. Unfortunately, we've run out of time as far as for questions today. It's already
yeah, I was just going to answer the last two ones.
Okay, go ahead.
Super fast, and I know we have to get to the next one. So the last one is how do you look up chart of accounts? You should reach out to your financial unit approver to find out where they're at. And then I did just see that it hit 2. So we do have about 4 questions left. We did take down your information in the question, and we'll go ahead and send follow-up questions on those for you guys.
All right. Thanks, Vanessa. And thanks to everyone. As always, my team is available via the UC San Diego Service and Support Portal. Please also, I can't stress it enough, feel free to join us for office hours on Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. where we can answer your questions live on a Zoom session. And don't forget to attend the Camp IPPS wrap up on Friday for a thank you and giveaways. This complete our camp for today. So from myself, the rest of the procurement card teams, we thank you for your times and question, and please enjoy the remainder of your day.